Tonight, a Politics Hub special as the Conservatives suffer their worst local election result in decades and lose a crucial by-election. Keir Starmer says Rishi Sunak's time is up as Labour wins Blackpool South with a huge swing and gets two crucial new mayors, one for the East Midlands and one for York and North Yorkshire in Rishi Sunak's backyard. The Prime Minister admits that overall results are disappointing, but scrawls a crucial win, which could help him stay in number 10. His colleague Ben Houchen clings on to the Tees Valley mayoralty. We have got full reaction and analysis tonight. We'll hear from the government after a bruising 24 hours. I'll be joined live by the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride. Plus, I'll speak to the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, and I'll ask her how much Labour's policy on Gaza has hurt their results so far. As Reform UK put in a strong showing in the Blackpool South by-election with a third-place result, I'll be joined live by Richard Tice, who's claiming his party is now the real opposition. And counting won't even start until tomorrow, but Labour's signalled they're a bit worried about whether Sadiq Khan can hold on as Mayor of London. Could we see a huge upset? All that and more with James Starkie and Caroline Flint, who will be with us for the next 2 hours. It's Friday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is a Politics Hub election special. Hello, good evening, and welcome to a special edition of the Politics Hub, with the Conservatives on track for their worst set of local council elections in 40 years. There was the occasional bright spot for the Prime Minister, with Ben Houchen retaining the Tees Valley mayoralty. But in seat after seat across the country, there was a story of Conservative losses and another punishing by-election defeat. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby, on the story of today's Tory collapse.
Applauding the win, this one extra sweet. Labour win in the York and North Yorkshire mayoral race right on Rishi Sunak's doorstep.
I'm very, very proud to be here in Northallerton celebrating this victory in Rishi Sunak's constituency.
This the highlight of a results day which showed the prospect of a Labour general election victory not nailed on, but certainly coming into view. Labour took scalps in Tory territory across the land. Seizing control of Redwall marginal Redditch with a crushing majority. They took Milton Keynes and even Rushmore in the Blue Wall for the first time, a victory even Tony Blair couldn't get.
I declare that Christopher Paul Webb is duly elected as the Member of Parliament for the Blackpool South constituency.
And in Blackpool, a stonking by-election battleground win in the only parliamentary seat on the ballot.
We have the saviour of the house.
Starmer there at dawn to hail a huge 26-point swing as this Boris Johnson Brexit win reversed. Those past victories now long gone, this as bad a night as the government had feared. Losses on Tory cabinet turf here in Penny Mordaunt's Portsmouth as the Lib Dems became the largest council party. And the Tories dropped to a record low. Conservatives hemorrhaging votes, but not all move into the Labour column as support scattered to smaller parties, suggesting a plague on both the main parties' houses, as well as signs Labour's stance on Gaza is perhaps costing them dear.
You think we can do it?
Yeah! And nowhere more disappointing than Harlow. Keir Starmer told us on the eve of the vote he had to win here. Insiders telling me they're gutted not to get this Essex target over the line. But in the Tees Valley mayoral race, symbolic crumbs of comfort for Sunak.
It's absolutely great to be here with your re-elected Mayor of Teesside.
A victory he can claim. But Gorlin, the only place the PM could turn up today, was a mayoral contest where he was airbrushed from the campaign. That now all forgotten.
It's also about this man next to me, because I could not have delivered the things that we've delivered in this region without you, Prime Minister.
Arms!
Sunak fighting a battle on multiple fronts. The reform vote share eating into Tory support.
Obviously, it's disappointing to lose good, hard-working Conservative councillors, and I'm grateful to them for all their service in local government, keeping council tax low and delivering services for local people. But we've still got lots of results to come as well.
The Tories have had a terrible night. One cabinet minister admitting to me it's only been Starmer's inability to turn Tory losses into direct Labour gains that have given the Prime Minister a little bit of breathing space. Meanwhile, Labour insiders tell me that their wins in key battlegrounds show they are on course to win a majority at a general election. But what's clear from all of it is Labour haven't yet sealed the deal. You, the voters, seem clear that the government is the problem, but are you convinced that Keir Starmer's the solution? Sky News' election projection on vote share puts Labour on course to be the largest party in the next parliament, but short of an outright majority. Labour will hope that voters choosing smaller parties and independents now will flock back when it comes to the national vote. But they simply don't know. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, Beth joins us now live. Beth, it's difficult with these council elections. There's always lots of different stories. You always have politicians pointing to individual council results or mayoralties to tell the narrative that they want. What do you think is the narrative for the last 24 hours?
I think going into this, there were two questions that we were asking that I think we do have better answers about now. The first was, how much trouble is Rishi Sunak in? Could he face a confidence vote? That kind of question. The second thing is Labour performing in a way in all these different elections around the country that suggests that they are going to head for a majority at a general election? So they're the two questions. I think the issue on Sunak is really clear. It has been a terrible night. They have been absolutely battered, and the only crumb of comfort has been Tees Valley. But I think that despite that at the moment, in terms of the soundings I've been taking, and I'm sure, James, you've got on, we'll talk about that a bit later, is that he seems safe for now. There was some nervousness, I think, this morning about whether or not one of the rebels might go over the top. Would someone go into the TV studios and say things? That didn't happen. And when I've spoken to some really senior Conservatives, the message I'm getting back is that, yes, this is dreadful, but there's a sense that it should be Rishi Sunak that owns these losses and, in a way, just let them own the losses, and then a new Conservative leader, should they lose the general election, takes over. So that is the kind of framing for the Conservatives, but there's not much comfort in any of this for them. I think for Labour, it's a little bit more complicated because if you look at the vote projections, which I know Ed's going to do, so I won't steal his thunder as if I could, you know, the way that Michael Thrasher has projected it is that Labour on course to be the largest party, but not winning a majority. If you talk to people inside Labour, they would say, look, the national equivalent vote share shows a 10% gap. On their calculations, they think that means they are heading for a general election victory. They would say, look at Scotland. You can't do this because in 2019 we didn't win any seats in Scotland, and now we're going to win a load of seats in Scotland potentially. And they would also say that what they were targeting in these locals was about battlegrounds. So could they win up and down the country? And what they would say is, look at the blue wall, look at the red wall. We are winning in battlegrounds. That's their argument. So you look at Rushmore, Redditch, they've just taken Tamworth. You look at places like that, Hartlepool, Milton Keynes, and they would argue that that shows that they are on course for that majority. I think the thing is, for Starmer, is that when you go around the country, the reality of it is you do not feel this massive enthusiasm for him. And I think there is a question for Labour. They would argue, look, come a general election, the way in which in local elections voters were voting for independents and smaller parties, they will come back to the two bigger parties and they will come back to Labour, and that's why they still have confidence. But there is a question here that when Starmer talks about the country wants change, that's the message. I've changed the party, that's his message. I think there's a question about how is he selling to the country the idea of a changed country under a Labour government, and it might be coming out the other end of this that some in the party still think he has more work to do on that.
OK, Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there giving us the state of play. Here we are. And for more from Beth, if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can also hear the latest edition of her podcast, Electoral Dysfunction, with Jess Phillips and Ruth Davidson. They're breaking down the results from the local elections and taking a look at this week's events in Scotland. You can follow them wherever you get your podcasts. Well, let's get the verdict of the results so far from our data editor, Ed Conway, and the current state of the parties.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, so let's just kind of start by kind of giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of these results. And we'll start with the seats that we've had, the state of the parties and where those seats have been won and indeed lost. And what you can see here is what we're looking at is these aren't just kind of net numbers here. These are showing you all of the gains and all of the losses from each different party. So there, look, Labour up by 226. But losing 60. Lib Dem's up by 62, down 13. The Conservatives, though, I have to step back for this one, down 358 and only gaining 4. Green Party with a pretty good show, actually, this time around. And then other, 106. And with that other, it's worth just kind of focusing on that, because Labour down 60, others up by 106. There's a bit of a story in some of the areas where you have higher shares of Muslim voters, where people have been moving away from the Labour Party, perhaps in response to the Gaza policies of Keir Starmer. And you see that here, actually. What this is showing you, and we're looking at ward-level data and breaking it down by areas in terms of the share of Muslim voters in these different wards. For areas with lower shares of Muslim voters, you've got a slight increase. There you can see it, just a slight increase towards Labour. And then down a lot in areas with high proportions of Muslim voters, so down by 17.9%. Really quite sizable, you know, and that does partly explain some of that fall in that previous chart. The other, of course, dynamic that we've seen continuing here, less of a surprise really, is what's happened in those areas that previously went across to the Conservative Party. So during Brexit, for instance, take these two councils here, Nuneaton, Bedworth and Cannock Chase. Both of them you had the whole council was up for election because you had boundary changes. These were both areas that really moved across. You had high Brexit votes, they moved across to the Conservative Party. And this time around, just look at these numbers. So Conservatives down 14, Labour up 15, Labour gained that from Conservative. Cannock Chase as well. Labour up 11, Conservatives down 11, Labour gained it from Conservatives. So you are seeing that direct transfer of seats in some of these areas. And when you look at the Brexit share of the vote here, again, this is a similar thing. What we're looking at, ward-level data, the further you go here, the higher the Brexit vote in various different areas. And just look at how those bars, they change as we go up. So as you go to higher Brexit votes, more people going away from the Conservatives, going back to the Labour Party. In a sense, it's kind of a reversion to what you had previously. Worth just saying as well, OK? The big picture here is really for the Conservative Party, it's not good. These are all of the councils that the Conservatives were defending at the start of these elections. So basically, all of these, I'll step back for a second, all of these were blue at the start of these results, at the start of this election. Now just look at how many different patchwork of colours you can see here. Lots of red for Labour, lots of dark grey for showing that they've lost control of those particular councils. And if we just look at the big picture here, the national equivalent share of the vote, Beth was talking about it a moment ago. This is giving you our sense, based on these results here, from Michael Thrasher, giving you a sense of where this might put the national equivalent share of the vote. Labour down ever so slightly to 35%. Lots of provisos, it's worth just saying, when you're doing this exercise, because that number, 22%, some might ask whether that's indeed possible to see independents go up that much. But really, the big thing to focus on here is the Conservatives, down to 26%. That's the worst that they've seen certainly since 2013, but actually you have to go all the way back to the kind of mid-90s to see anything like it. The thing that I suppose will concern Keir Starmer is you're not seeing anything like the height of the national equivalent share of the vote for the Labour Party as you did back in the 90s. Even so, really striking. And, you know, we're only still in the, we're in the kind of halfway stage. There's still a lot more results yet to come. But so far, this is the big picture.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Ed Conway there with all of those data and statistics taking us through. And of course, the election results are likely to dominate tomorrow's newspapers as well. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us for that will be The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and The Guardian's deputy political editor, Jessica Elgott. Well, let's bring in our very own duo for this evening, shall we? The former Government Special Advisor, James Starkie, and the former Labour Minister, Caroline Flint. Great to have you here for our bumper 2-hour special. And goodness, we've got a lot to talk about. James, I'm going to have Mel Stride on in a minute. He's going to say, look, this is a tough set of results, but, you know, you'd expect this for a party that's been in power this long, and Labour haven't performed as well as they should either. It's been worse than that for the Conservatives, though, right?
I think that it's been, to sound like a politician myself, it's been worse, but it's also matched expectations. So I think that's kind of what's filtered through the coverage, in that the briefing beforehand, the expectation was beforehand was they probably would lose about 500 seats, and that those two mayoral results, Ben Houchen and Andy Street, were seen as quite key. And Beth touched on whether Rebels would move against Rishi, and it was kind of seen if they held those. I think they will end up holding. Andy Street will end up holding, so you will end up holding those. So I think those are things to cling on to. I mean, one interesting thing looking at those charts is we obviously looked at the Blackpool result and how Reform did. Reform, I think, stood in only 13% of council seats. So there's still, for those that remember Donald Rumsfeld, there's still an unknown. You know, there's a known unknown. We know Reform are going to stand, and we can see the others on there. We don't know what impact those kinds of parties are going to have on the result of the general election. Particularly
if Nigel Farage decides to, you know, lead Reform.
The big question is, will Nigel come back in?
And we'll ask Richard Tice later on the programme. Caroline, the narrative seems to be voters turning away from the Conservatives, and in many places turning to Labour, but not in all places.
I think for Labour, they'll be looking at this and say, where we wanted to do well, we've done well. And actually, there's been a few, not surprises, but some really quite gratifying results in York and North Yorkshire. You know, actually, that's not an easy place for Labour to win and across that region. But they've won there. They've won, obviously, in North Cumbria, but they've also won in the East Midlands as well, where you had a big personality in the terms of Ben Bradley, the other Ben to Ben Houchen in Tees Valley. And, of course, even in the areas, even some of the councils where it's gone to no over control, or even in Harlow, which the Conservatives retained, Labour was making gains. So I think so far, they will be very pleased with these results. But you're right, and Ed sort of covered this in his graphs earlier. If you look at the Brexit vote, that has collapsed for the Tories. That sort of vote in those strong Leave seats has collapsed pretty much for the Tories in many ways. And Labour has picked up, but it hasn't matched the collapse in the Tory vote. And that's where I think possibly the issue around Reform UK steps in, because they are taking away from the Tories, I would say, at this point, more than Labour. So there are a few cracks for Labour, looking at some of those strong Muslim voter areas. But I don't think that's a crisis for Labour, and we might talk a bit more about that later on. But yeah, I mean, clearly, whilst Labour's vote share is slightly down, I think the Conservatives is something like 2.5% down. That should be very worrying, because Rishi Sunak's premiership is not leading to any advancement. They aren't moving at all forward in terms of the journey to the next general election.
I guess this is the point, isn't it? You know, if Rishi Sunak's mission was to close the gap with Labour, he's not done that, right? So what do the Conservatives... If you were in number 10 now advising, you know, Rishi Sunak, what would you be saying? Is there anything he can do at this point? Or actually, has he just got to keep doing the same thing and hoping that the outcomes change?
So if you look at the results, there's very low turnout. So, I mean, in extremely in some cases, I think there's a PCC election with an 8% turnout. So what we know from the polls, and what there's evidence for with today's results, obviously over the weekend, is that there is a significant number of don't knows, of unknowns. Someone put it to one of the Labour voices overnight, I think on Sky, that the leading favourite to be Prime Minister amongst the public is, I don't know, Starmer second to it. And that kind of reflects the mood of the public, I think. You know, whichever party you're from, I think there is that sense of, you know, no one's really put that compelling case. So the Conservatives will be looking at those don't knows, and they need to win those over if they're going to have a chance at the election. And I think those are a group of people who, by and large, aren't paying a huge amount of attention. I know people who knocked on doors yesterday going to do the get out the vote, and there were people who actually didn't know there was an election happening. Right? That's and that's less likely in a general.
Yeah.
And that's my point. In a general election, the public will swing round, they'll pay attention, and they'll realise, and things will be different because, as I'm sure many Conservatives have pointed out today, they'll be choosing a Prime Minister, they'll be choosing a government. This is not to say I think the Tories are going to go romp to an 80 majority, but my point is this. If you're therefore in Downing Street, what you've got to do is you've got to show some delivery on key issues.
I think, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but I think actually from my experience, Labour tends to actually underperform in local elections than it does in general elections. So I think, you know, Labour strategists will be looking at this. They will be looking at how these results, particularly in the mayoral elections, play out in those constituencies. And if you look at Tees Valley, you know, credit to Ben Houchen, his brand has won, but he's 20 points down on his majority a few years back. And when you look at those Tees Valley seats, actually, based on that outcome, most of them should go to Labour.
If you got, 73% of the vote share, then you're OK, but otherwise,
yeah,
I might be a little bit concerned. Thank you both very much indeed. We'll have lots more from James and Caroline on the programme. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Can Rishi Sunak prevent a Conservative drubbing at the general election? We'll be speaking to the Work and Pensions Secretary, Mel Stride. Some strong gains for Labour, but has Keir Starmer sealed the deal with voters? I'll speak to Labour's Yvette Cooper. Stay with us.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, you know, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling? I am angry. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
You're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that.
We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world.
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Hello, welcome back to this Politics Hub election special. Right, let's hear from the Conservatives, shall we? The Work and Pensions Secretary, Mel Stride, is here. Thank you very much for being with us. I gather you haven't had much sleep, so this is the kind of last hurrah. How would you describe the results?
Well, they've been difficult, there's no doubt about that. But I think within that, there are a couple of points that I've made. One is that in 2021, when we last had these local elections, of course, that was a high water mark. We had the bounce from the COVID vaccine rollout, so it's quite a high bar to be compared with. And the second thing is, I think amongst the results, there are some things that have been encouraging. Now, one of those clearly is the Tees Valley result. The fact that Ben Houchin won in every 5 of the boroughs that sit beneath that mayoral area, I think is very important. It's clearly an area that Labour must win if they are to get the keys to number 10, right at the heart of the Red Wall. And the other result was Harlow, where in fact Keir Starmer went there with Angela Rayner the night before the election for a big rally and made it very clear and very public that in order to get the keys to number 10, Harlow was the kind of council that they had to win, and of course that didn't happen. So I think mixed, of course, and a lot still to do, but the general election will be something different. Maybe we'll come on to this.
Yes.
Than the local results.
We will, but at the same time, we are on local election night special programme, so we should sort of start with the locals. And look, this isn't my first rodeo. Look, I know when politicians come into these interviews, you're going to pick the results that tell your narrative, but you're really saying that your 2 bright spots is Ben Houchin losing 20% of his vote share in Tees Valley and the Conservatives losing 5 seats in Harlow. You say it's a mixed set of results. I mean, what would be a bad set of results? All candidates been taken out by a meteor?
OK. Well, I made the point about the high water mark in 2021. Of course, then Ben got 73% of the vote. It was astronomical. But if you went back to the first time he got elected, actually it was down at 40%. So he's considerably advanced, even this time around, on that first election success. So look, I'm not putting any gloss on this. At the end of the day, it's been a tough set of results, and we've got to pick ourselves up and do the right things to make sure we're in the right shape for the general election, because the poll that's really going to matter, as you know, Sophie, is going to be what happens in the general election, and that is a very different kind of contest.
I'm interested when you say you have to do the right thing for the general election, because normally when parties have a bad set of results, you say that you're listening to what the voters have said. So does that mean you're going to change something as a result of these elections? OK, so the manifesto has yet to be created, and it wouldn't be right for me to opine on what may or may not be within that. But I think what we've got to do as a party, and there's been a lot of talk about unity and whether we're behind the Prime Minister, etc., which we totally are, is we've got to start outward-facing, and we've got to start talking and communicating effectively about the things that we're doing, our record. So getting down inflation from 11 to 3%, getting real wages increasing in each of the last 9 months, tackling those cost of living issues, cutting people's tax. 1/3 off national insurance for employees is a huge tax cut, worth £900 for an average earner per year. We're looking at, as you know, migration. We've got our Rwanda bill through, and contrasting that with where Labour is at the moment. Now, where Labour is on the migration, of course, is they've said that the 90,000 plus illegal migrants that are here, they're prepared to effectively look at some kind of soft amnesty style arrangements around that. We've got to get into taking those arguments and battles to Labour. It's going to be easier as the election closer to the election, because what Labour will then have to do is start explaining what their policies are. And at the moment, in many areas like mine, welfare, I have no idea what Labour believes. Just talking again about the Conservative Party, because you're not just losing votes to Labour, you're losing votes to the Green Party, to Independents, to Reform. And just listening to you, it does sound like you're basically just saying you need to communicate the things you're already doing better. Is that enough? Voters already know what your policy is on, whether it's inflation or Rwanda. Voters know that, and they've still rejected you. Are you not going to change anything?
So as we come towards the general election, clearly there will be manifesto commitments that we made and lots of exciting and interesting things that will be said by the Conservative Party at that point. The point that I make is that as we approach that general election, quite rightly, it's going to be framed as the Conservatives versus Keir Starmer. Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, who's going to get the keys to number 10 and govern the country? And I think at that point, people are going to expect more of Labour in terms of telling us what they actually stand for. We've had this Ming vase strategy, where Keir Starmer has carried this Ming vase, trying to protect his poll lead across this slippery floor for fear of dropping it. OK, that won't last. It won't wash into a general election. So I think we're going to see a very different dynamic going forward. But I do accept that, of course, these results have been difficult, and it pains me that so many great Conservative councillors who've stood up for their communities are now no longer representing those communities.
We've got Richard Tice on the programme later today. They ran you pretty close second, didn't they, in Blackpool South. What's your strategy for dealing with Reform?
Well, there's no doubt that Reform is very unlikely to win seats at the next general election under the first past the post
but they could take votes off you
system.
that's
exactly
thing, right?
So what that therefore leads to is the conclusion that voting for reform is effectively a vote for the Labour Party. Now, you saw that even in Blackpool South, actually, where, you know, there was, as you say, quite a significant, relatively significant poll for reform, but it's not enough. It's nowhere near when you went back to UKIP, for example, in the 2015 or thereabouts, and you looked at what they were doing in by-elections. It was much more impressive.
Maybe if Nigel Farage joins reform or leads reform, it could change.
Who can predict the future on a number of different counts? But I think the main point, and get back to your question, is that when it comes to reform, yes, we've got to address the issues that reform voters are quite rightly vexed by, and immigration is one of them, and I've spoken a little bit about that. But equally, it is just simply the case that under our electoral system, if you're going to vote for reform, I'm afraid you're going to help the Labour Party.
So you're not worried about them?
I didn't say that.
A little bit worried?
I said, well, if we're in a situation where clearly reform is stopping Conservative members of Parliament being elected, and in their place we're getting Labour Party members and a Labour government, then of course that's a concern. But my appeal would be to that come the general election, that those that are thinking of voting that way bear in mind the fact that it is a simple equation. If you vote for reform, you're going to get Labour.
Now, you said that you don't want to predict results, so apologies in advance for this last question. There are a few rumours swirling about what's happening in London, that we could see an upset. What are you picking up?
Right, OK. You're trying to draw me into some kind of speculation,
aren't
you? I know.
Yeah,
you're brilliant at the way you do it. No, you're quite right. Right, I'm not going to sort of chomp that one all in one bite. Look, I don't know. We have to wait for the results. There are indeed suggestions that it might be tighter than one would imagine. And I think that speaks to an important point here, actually, is that we've had a lot of results so far, but we still have a lot more to come, including, of course, the West Midlands mayoral result as well. So let's wait and see what happens.
But you are picking up rumours that it might be closer than...
I'm only picking up what you're picking up, Sophie, which is that it may or may not be
WhatsApp's exploding, etc., etc.
Well, we don't quite know. What I do know is Sadiq Khan. You know, you've got knife crime going up, you've got ULEZ in the outer boroughs, you've got the war on motorists, you've got loading up, residents
so you didn't
in London.
Vote for Sadiq Khan, though? No.
Strangely, I didn't. Okay. No.
Mel Stride,
anyway,
thank you very much indeed. Mel Stride there, the Work and Pension Secretary. Well, the election results are likely to dominate tomorrow's newspapers, and we're going to have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and The Guardian's deputy political editor, Jessica Eldot. You're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News. The top stories tonight. Keir Starmer says it's time for Rishi Sunak to face the nation and call a general election after the Conservatives suffer a hammering at the local elections. Well, Rishi Sunak has admitted that results have been disappointing, but he says holding on to the Tees Valley mayoralty was a very important test that his party passed. You can stay up to date with all the goings on in the election this weekend on our digital politics hub, including Sky News' projection, which shows Labour would be on course to be the largest party in a general election, but would fall short of an overall majority. We'll be speaking to Sky's election analyst about our national share estimate a bit later in the programme. You can find out more by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. Well, still to come here on the Politics Hub, we'll hear in a moment from Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Plus, the Labour MP Clive Betts, who says the party now needs to do more to address the concerns of Muslim voters. And we'll also be hearing from this man there, Reform UK leader Richard Tice. He's claiming his party now the real opposition and not the Conservatives. Well, all that and more, just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen to get a bit more information on that. Right, let's get some reaction, shall we, from Labour. Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, joins us now from Leeds. Thank you very much for being on the programme. So just give us your reaction to the results that we've seen.
Well, I think the results really right across the country show the country's desperate for change and is supporting Labour to deliver change. We know there's still a lot of work we want to keep doing, but to have that result in Blackpool, which was the only parliamentary result yesterday, that was a really strong swing, more than 20% swing from Conservatives to Labour, and that's now the 6th parliamentary by-election that we've seen swing to Labour. We've also seen really strong Police and Crime Commissioner results winning Cleveland, Avon and Somerset, Norfolk, Cumbria, right across the country, winning on issues around law and order as well. So we're obviously very pleased with the results, but I think what it really shows is the country just needs a general election now. That was the real message of the elections we've had so far.
As you say, there's clearly a lot of bright spots for Labour, whether it's winning mayoralties or council seats, and of course the by-election with that big swing. At the same time, though, the Labour vote in the council elections was pretty much unchanged from last year. I just feel like, week after week we hear you and your shadow cabinet colleagues talking about how terrible the Conservative government is, how they're incompetent, how they're corrupt, how they're breaking the law, how, we see them losing seats to just about everyone, but not necessarily going straight to the Labour Party. Do you feel that, for some people, they agree with your message about the Conservatives, but they're just not completely sold on you yet?
Well, the Blackpool by-election shows people swinging directly from Conservatives to Labour. And we've seen that in a series of other by-elections, from Wellingborough to Selby to really right across the country. So we will continue working. We know we need to earn every vote. And we also know that Labour has come a long way. Labour has changed under Keir Starmer's leadership. We have come a long way since the 2019 election, which was a very bad election for us, to now be really earning back that support on issues ranging from crime, neighbourhood policing, the National Health Service, the cost of living, and support for the economy, get our economy back on track. So those are about positive things that Labour is campaigning on, not just the deep frustration that, frankly, everybody does have, that after 14 years, the country feels broken under the Conservatives, and we just can't afford any more of it.
I mean, look, I don't think anyone would disagree that you've made a lot of progress since 2019. But I guess the question is whether we're about to see, a kind of Blair-style majority, the kind of swings that you need, because you need a big swing, in order to get a convincing majority at the next election. And look, with all the usual caveats, people not voting the same way in local and general elections, Sky's projection puts you as the largest party in a parliament, not a majority, if the results are replicated in a general election. Do you think you're on course for a strong majority?
Well, obviously, you're right, the local elections don't translate completely to national elections just because of often you get smaller parties will do better in local elections in smaller wards and so on. But in the end, when it comes to a general election, fundamentally, it is a choice between a Conservative government and a Labour government. Not a single vote has been cast in that general election yet. And that's why our view is we will keep working for every single vote. You've heard Keir Starmer talk about no complacency, but it runs much deeper than that. We really believe we have got to earn every single vote in a general election and set out the desperate changes we need, from crime and policing to the economy. In every area, we badly need change, and that's what we will keep working for.
It also does feel that in some areas of the country, voters have been turning away from the Labour Party because they're unhappy with your stance on Gaza. And I guess there's two ways of looking at that. You either think, look, we believe that we've got the right position, and so we will keep on with what we think is the right thing, no matter if it will upset some of our supporters. Or you think, no, we're in listening mode, we're going to change our position, we're going to listen to what you say. How are you going to respond to that evidence?
Well, we do recognise that Gaza obviously has been a factor in some areas. There have also been areas where it was partly a factor and there were other council factors as well. So it's lots of different things. But undoubtedly, for many people feel really strongly about this, and rightly, because tens of thousands of people have been killed, including the majority of them women and children. We desperately need an immediate ceasefire. We need the hostages released, and we need the urgent humanitarian action that's needed.
Are you changing your position? Or are you listening and changing, or do you think that you're on the right course already?
So I think we have to recognise the strength of feeling on this issue, and I think we always take the view in the Labour Party that we need to earn every vote, and therefore we have to always listen and reflect. When we lose votes in any area, we always have to listen. And
there with it, are you saying that you're going to reflect, but what are you going to change your position, or are you going to keep on doing the same thing?
Well, the position that we've set out, and in some ways, really, these are about international issues that are really far more important than any political party debates, than any of the things that we're talking about, where you have so many lives at risk. We're desperately worried about the risks of a new Rafah offensive. We are desperately hoping for success in the negotiations to get the immediate ceasefire in place. But I think there is also this broader issue about the need to get a long-term peace process on track, which involves a two-state solution that has to include recognition of a Palestinian state, that has to include that two-state solution in order to get any kind of sustainable peace in the Middle East and to prevent more lives being lost. So you look, this broader debate about what happens in the Middle East and the desperate action that's needed is going to continue, and we will continue to be part of that debate, and we will also need to reflect on results in all parts of the country in terms of the political situation. The Labour Party will keep working to try and earn every single vote.
There's one other question I do want to ask you, because there's been a few jitters in London. Look, we don't know the result. It's going to be tomorrow. It could be late tomorrow as well. But some suggestion that Susan Hall might be running Sadiq Khan a bit closer than expected. Wes Streeting told me earlier today that he stood by his comments that a vote for her is effectively a vote for white supremacists and racists. Do you agree with him?
I think that we've seen from the Conservatives in London, from Susan Hall, really a very divisive campaigning that is damaging. And what we need is to be able to pull London together, also to be able to pull the whole country together. That's the kind of thing that we need to see. Not
but is it divisive? Is it divisive to say that a vote for Susan Hall is a vote for racists?
I think that it's really important. We've been really clear about the way in which the Conservatives have campaigned in London being divisive and being damaging. And what we need to do is to pull the capital together of the country. I do think that Sadiq Khan has been doing that, and he has been working across different communities across the capital, working immensely hard on everything from London transport to support for children in schools to support for tackling and the reforms that are needed in the Metropolitan Police, where he's been doing an immense amount of work.
OK, Yvette Cooper, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme today. Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, we'll get the verdict on the results so far from our election analyst, Professor Michael Thrasher. Plus, we'll be looking ahead to what's in store tomorrow, including, as we've been discussing, could Sadiq Khan be in for a shock in the race to be London Mayor? Hello and welcome back to a Politics Hub special where we're unpicking all the results so far from yesterday's elections. Now, as the political parties have been trying to put their own spin on today's results in an attempt to make the results either much better or less bad than they look on the surface. But what have we learned about what the public actually want? Well, the people have spoken, but what do they mean? Here's our political correspondent Rob Powell on whether today marked a turning point.
Wheels up from newly Labour-held Blackpool. Hundreds of thousands of holidaymakers used to pass through the town's airport, but it's been a decade since big passenger flights left here for European hotspots. The boss of this hangar says there's still untapped potential.
Blackpool has got a remarkable opportunity because of the size of the infrastructure. We've got such a lot of underutilised resource here.
Is there a role for national government in this? You hear a lot about sort of levelling up and investment in, I guess, like a place like the North West and Blackpool. Is that materialising?
We do. We haven't seen a lot of it here yet.
At the town's cricket club, the Labour leader pledged a fresh start and a reverse to years of decline.
We don't accept this hopelessness of the Tories that nothing can get better.
But there was also an acknowledgement of votes being lost in other parts of the country. How much do you think the Middle East position is factoring into this?
Well, look, there are some places where that's a very strong factor, and I understand that and respect that. Where we have lost votes, we will earn them back.
Labour were confident of winning in Blackpool South, and the result here was emphatic, suggesting the party may well win back plenty of those seats that Boris Johnson took in 2019. Elsewhere, though, results were more of a mixed bag, suggesting that Sir Keir Starmer has a bit more work to do. 30 miles down the road in Blackburn, Labour lost seats to councillors who quit the party over Gaza and stood as independents. Hussein said the Middle East weighs on his mind.
There's conflict there, there's genocide going on at the moment. We want something to be done, put in place that will stop this genocide.
Would that affect whether you sort of wanted to vote for Labour?
Yes, definitely it would.
But Imran thinks domestic pressures are more important.
About hospitals and education and jobs, what politicians and government should be implemented in this country.
The London commuter town of Harlow is somewhere Sir Keir Starmer said Labour needed to win. But despite taking seats, the Tories kept control of the council.
I don't believe in the Labour regime at all. They don't give you the confidence to do that, the MPs.
I said to you yesterday, do you want to go vote? You said no.
Nah, I just couldn't. I just couldn't be bothered.
Labour remains the big winner in these results so far, but as the Tories shed support across the country, where those votes go could be crucial come the general election. Rob Powell, Sky News in Lancashire.
Well, with 2 million votes cast in the English council elections now counted, Sky News' provisional national share estimate shows that Labour is on course to be the largest party in Parliament, but would fall short of a majority, while Labour's vote rises from 33% in 2019 to 35% on the current estimate. That's after more than half of the wards have been declared. The Conservatives would be on just 26% of the vote, a 19-point drop compared with the 2019 general election. The Lib Dems are on 16%, an increase of 5 percentage points on the 2019 election. Well, that would see, in our House of Commons projection, Labour getting 294 seats, 32 seats short of a majority. The Conservatives would be on 242 and the Lib Dems on 38. Well, let's bring in Sky's election analyst, Professor Michael Thrasher. Just talk us through what you found.
Well, it's an interesting picture in what is a complex set of local elections, but we're all agreed, really. It's been a dreadful set of results for the Conservatives, but it hasn't been unequivocally good for Labour either. We've seen Labour losing seats in some parts of the country to independents and so on. So we use the votes in the wards to calculate a national estimate of, if this had been a nationwide election, what would have been the outcome. And that shows, compared with the general election in 2019, the Conservative vote is down 19 percentage points with that outcome. But that 19% drop is not reflected in Labour's rise. Labour's only up 2 percentage points on that general election. And it's the vote for other parties and the Liberal Democrats that really explains the shift in votes. And when we put those numbers into a model which says we'll assume that the change in the vote share for the Conservatives is 19 percentage points everywhere, and Labour's is up 2% everywhere. The figures that we get out are that Labour is overtaking the Conservatives. The Conservatives lose their overall majority. But crucially, Labour remains on 294. Remember, it's got to get 326 to win an overall majority.
I mean, how seriously should we take the... Because look, you know, at local elections, people will vote for the Henley Residents Association or for Count Binface, and probably in a general election, they might not do that.
That's a good point, and but we don't know that in a general election. But this is the practice that we always do. When we have local elections, we always ask ourselves, and why not? What would this have been like if it had been a general election? But what is happening with local voters now is that more and more they're willing to engage with smaller parties. And what we've also seen in local elections is the rise of these small council-based small parties, the independents. And this was exaggerated even more this year, because in some areas that are traditionally dominated by the Labour Party, we've seen lots of independent, or the Labour Party splintering, lots of independent groups are rising up, and people supporting those parties as opposed to supporting the Labour Party. So that's what complicates the picture. But it's an exercise in saying, if the general election had been like this, with this distribution across these different parties, Labour would not have won an overall majority. But it does point out the enormity of the task facing Labour at the next general election. Starmer and his party require a swing larger than any that we've seen in any post-war election, just to win a majority of 2 seats. 12.7% swing, right? Not even Tony Blair achieved that performance in the 1997 general election. So it does point up that Labour has a problem. Dreadful set of elections, but Labour still is not crossed the line, even on these results.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for your analysis and for your work throughout the day as well, Professor Michael Thrasher there. We can bring you a council result that has declared while we've been on air, which is Dudley, and hopefully that should be on your screens right now. And again, a similar story, the Conservatives losing control of that council. It is now under no overall control. They've lost 11 seats. 7 of them have gone to the Labour Party, now joint with the Conservatives on 34 seats each, 3 to the Lib Dems and 1 going to another party as well. Previously, pre-election, the Conservative majority was 18. So interesting to see there what's happening in Dudley. Again, one of these areas that's going to be so important at a general election, the Conservatives shedding seats there. Still to come on the Politics Hub. We'll ask where the parties go from here with our panel, the former Conservative Special Advisor James Starkie and the former Labour Minister Caroline Flint. That's next.
The type of religions I do, it's almost theatre of the mind. So it's using people's memories, emotions and experiences and
I'm scared.
Crafting some things from those things. You seem terrified. I promise it's going to be okay.
So you're going to give us an example?
I would love to show you something if that's
please do.
okay. Yeah. So I brought like a book that inspired me as a kid. Obviously, Harry Potter, Goblet of Fire. It's the real deal. Did you read this as a kid? Oh, clearly you know it well. Book 4.
No, it's not. No, it's later. It's 5.
Goblet of Fire is 5.
You've disgraced yourself on air, Will. Oh my goodness.
Yes, I'm a big fan. I haven't read them for a long time.
Well, grab it for me right now. You're going to start from the beginning and read to the end. No, don't worry, please. First of all, please make sure it is the real Harry Potter book. Have a good look through it.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to ask you to do, please, I'm going to turn away whilst he does this. You and I will stare intensely at each other.
Okay.
And open up to any page that you like, Will. And once you've done that, you are going to focus on a word on that page. Now, this is live on air. I don't want you to choose a short word like goblet or fire. Choose a really long word with lots of letters, something that's going to challenge me. Choose a really long word. Do you have a nice long word in mind?
I do.
Don't say it out loud. Close the book. And is it safe for me to turn around now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to start really simply. All you're going to do is just focus on the first letter of that word. Get that first letter inside your head. And now you're going to jump to another letter inside the word as well. Perfect. What was the first letter of the word that you were focused on?
G.
G, yes. And now you're just going to focus on the second letter. Don't say it out loud. Is that an R that you're focused on?
It is.
It is, yes?
Oh my God.
OK, I'm going to take a hit on this. I'm going to show you. I think this is related to family.
It is.
And the way that you're holding your hands right now, it clearly is.
Wow.
Maybe someone that's inspired you. What was the word that you were focused on? A word in tens of thousands.
Grandfatherly.
Not grandfather, grandfatherly. Something like this, yes?
Unless Leah is your mole.
Innocent
You planted her years ago.
This is a strange insight into some of the illusions that you'll see in Wonders. So you see, it's not strange props or people in boxes. It's taking people back in time to those experiences that maybe inspired them in their life.
That was insane.
That was amazing.
Thank you, my friend.
I promise I was looking, like,
Yeah.
there was no family business.
Big stage show. It's in the Theatre Royal in Brighton, which is a beautiful show. And it's a show that explores the power of wonder in your life, how that can motivate and inspire you.
Welcome back to our election special on Politics Hub. We've been talking a lot about London, picking up a few rumours. We don't know yet, obviously, but I thought it was worth just asking you both for a quick prediction on London. James, what do you reckon?
I don't know what's going to happen, but with all the talk, I think one interesting thing is if you go look at the last 4 or 5 years, it's been considered a Labour city and impossible. And I think my prediction would be whatever the results, when we come out of it, that will no longer be the case and it will be seen as at least winnable, even if it's not won by the Conservatives.
Interesting. Caroline, what do you think?
I think we're having a new way of voting in the mayoral elections, and that's first past the post. And I think in the past, a Labour candidate, Sadiq Khan, would have benefited from Greens, Liberals and others, if you like, to the left, voting their second preference for Labour.
Exactly.
He hasn't got that comfort this time, so maybe it's going to be closer than we might have thought.
Really interesting. Definitely one worth for sticking around for tomorrow when that does come in. Thanks both. We'll have lots more from James and Caroline, and stay with us because after the break we'll have the second part of this Politics Hub election special. The leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, will be here next, and lots more still to discuss with our panel and the team as well. Tonight, a Politics Hub special as the Conservatives suffer their worst local election results in decades and lose a crucial by-election. Keir Starmer says Rishi Sunak's time is up as Labour wins Blackpool South with a huge swing and gets two crucial new mayors, one for the East Midlands and one for York and North Yorkshire, in Rishi Sunak's backyard. The Prime Minister admits overall results are disappointing but scores a crucial win which helps them stay in number 10. His colleague Ben Houchen clings on to the Tees Valley mayoralty. As Reform UK put in a strong showing in the Blackpool South by-election with a close third place, I'll be joined live by Richard Tice, who's claiming his party's now the real opposition. Plus, I'll be speaking to the Lib Dem's housing spokesperson Helen Morgan. Plus, did the Gaza factor cost Labour votes? I'll speak to the Labour MP Clive Batts. All that and more with James Starkie and Caroline Flint, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Friday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is a Politics Hub election special. Hello, good evening, and welcome to the second hour of a special edition of the Politics Hub, with the Conservatives on track for their worst set of local council elections in 40 years. There was the occasional bright spot for the Prime Minister, with Ben Houchen retaining the Tees Valley mayoralty, but in seat after seat across the country, there was a story of Conservative losses and another punishing by-election defeat. Here's our political editor Beth Rigby on the story of today's Tory collapse.
Applauding the win, this one extra sweet. Labour win in the York and North Yorkshire mayoral race right on Rishi Sunak's doorstep.
I'm very, very proud to be here in Northallerton celebrating this victory in Rishi Sunak's constituency.
This the highlight of a results day which showed the prospect of a Labour general election victory not nailed on, but certainly coming into view. Labour took scalps in Tory territory across the land, seizing control of Redwall marginal Redditch with a crushing majority. They took Milton Keynes and even Rushmore in the Blue Wall for the first time, a victory even Tony Blair couldn't get.
I declare that Christopher Paul Webb is duly elected as the Member of Parliament for the Blackpool South constituency.
And in Blackpool, a stonking by-election battleground win in the only parliamentary seat on the ballot.
We have the baby of the house.
Starmer there at dawn to hail a huge 26-point swing as this Boris Johnson Brexit win reversed. Those past victories now long gone, this as bad a night as the government had feared. Losses on Tory cabinet turf here in Penny Mordaunt's Portsmouth as the Lib Dems became the largest council party.
Let's make this Conservative government history.
Their leader Ed Davey hoping for Tory extinction as the Tories dropped to a record low. Conservatives hemorrhaging votes, but not all move into the Labour column as support scattered to smaller parties, suggesting a plague on both the main parties' houses, as well as signs Labour's stance on Gaza is perhaps costing them dear.
Do you think we can do it?
Yeah!
And nowhere more disappointing than Harlow. Keir Starmer told us on the eve of the vote he had to win here. Insiders telling me they're gutted not to get this Essex target over the line. But in the Tees Valley mayoral race, symbolic crumbs of comfort for Sunak.
It's absolutely great to be here with your re-elected Mayor of Teesside.
A victory he can claim. But Gorlin, the only place the PM could turn up today was a mayoral contest where he was airbrushed from the campaign. That now all forgotten.
It's also about this man next to me, because I could not have delivered the things that we've delivered in this region without you, Prime Minister.
Sunak fighting a battle on multiple fronts. The Reform vote share eating into Tory support.
Obviously, it's disappointing to lose good, hard-working Conservative councillors, and I'm grateful to them for all their service in local government, keeping council tax low and delivering services for local people. But we've still got lots of results to come as well.
The Tories have had a terrible night. One cabinet minister admitting to me it's only been Starmer's inability to turn Tory losses into direct Labour gains that have given the Prime Minister a little bit of breathing space. Meanwhile, Labour insiders tell me that their wins in key battlegrounds show they are on course to win a majority at a general election. But what's clear from all of it is Labour haven't yet sealed the deal. You, the voters, seem clear that the government is the problem, but are you convinced that Keir Starmer's the solution? Sky News' election projection on vote share puts Labour on course to be the largest party in the next Parliament, but short of an outright majority. Labour will hope that voters choosing smaller parties and independents now will flock back when it comes to the national vote. But they simply don't know. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Right, let's get the results so far from our data editor Ed Conway and the current state of the parties. Ed.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, first of all, let's just have a look at where we are, really. Obviously, there have been all sorts of different results that we've had, all the way from that by-election result. But really, the main action so far today has been about this. It's been about the changes in councils, in those council elections we've had so far. And what this shows you is just how much churn there's been below the surface. So you don't actually get these numbers at the bottom of the screen because you see the total net change. What you don't see is that Labour actually gained 241, but in the meantime lost 71 seats. What you don't see is the Conservatives gained 4 and then lost 415. I mean, not much of a, of a net change there. But all the same, the Lib Dems, a pretty good showing here. Green's doing very well indeed. Other parties, so including independents, up by 115 and then losing 13. And that's one of the big stories here. One of the big stories being that Labour lost 71 seats, and quite a few of them in areas where previously they might have hoped to win them. Why is that? Well, part of the pattern we can see is evinced by this. This shows you, we've looked at ward-level data and broken it down and looked at areas with a low Muslim population and then a higher Muslim population, so over 20% Muslim population in each of these wards. And what you can see in areas where you have under 5% Muslim population, a slight increase in the Labour vote, and then going down to a big fall in higher proportions Muslim population areas there, underlining the fact there is this disaffection with Labour foreign policy, particularly in relation to Gaza right now. And you can see that in those overall numbers. I'll come back to that in a second, actually. But there's another thing, another shift that we've seen recently. It's this shift in areas that were previously strong Brexit voting areas that did go to the Conservatives are now shifting back to the Labour Party. So look at this. This is Nuneaton and Bedworth, Cannock Chase as well. It's a really similar story here. So look at the number of the seats. And remember here, this is a boundary change. So all of those seats were up for grabs. In Nuneaton and Bedworth, Conservatives down by 14, Labour up by 15, so you can see pretty much a swap there. And same thing in Cannock Chase as well. Conservatives down 11, Labour up 11, and in both cases, Labour gaining control from the Conservatives. So you are seeing something, particularly in the West Midlands there, that reverts. And looking at that kind of reversion, these are the seats, or rather the councils, that the Conservatives were defending in these elections here. So at the start of this contest, I'll get out of the way so you can see it, at the start of this contest, essentially all of this board was blue, all of these councils. So that puts it into context, doesn't it? And now just look at the change in colours. You know, all the way from some of Nuneaton and Bedworth, which I mentioned, all of these grey ones, that means the Conservatives losing control of those councils. Even to places like Rushmore, Redditch, Rushmore in particular, no one really necessarily expected that a seemingly safe Conservative council would go to the Labour Party there. And when you kind of look at what we're talking about here, which is comparing the areas here with 2021, so the numbers you've got on your screen are mostly comparing with the previous elections in 2021, there was a big shift, OK? So the Conservatives down by 13, Labour up by 5.4% compared with 2021. So that was the big shift. But of course, remember, the Conservatives were riding high at that point. You had this vaccine bounce, everything looking quite positive at that point for Boris Johnson, as he was. But now compare this election, this council election, local elections, with last time around, 2023. Keir Starmer looking pretty punchy at that point, almost a 20-point margin between the two parties at that point. And the difference here, the Conservatives down by 2.5%, but actually Labour down by 1.2%. And that's partly what I think explains what you see in this picture, and in Beth's package a moment ago, she referred to this, the national equivalent vote. This goes all the way back to the 1990s. Just look at the red, look at Labour, actually falling a touch there, down to 35% here. But really the big action and the most significant kind of trend is the Conservatives down to 26%. That's the lowest they've been, actually kind of similar more or less in 2013, but you've really got to go back to the kind of mid-90s to see another period when they were quite so low. The difference for the Labour Party is they are not up at those kind of levels that Tony Blair enjoyed in the mid-90s. They are still down there. However, and I think it's a big proviso. First of all, that hasn't taken account of what's happening in Scotland at the moment. Really big story right now because, of course, these elections don't refer to that. And secondly, you've got to ask the question whether that 22% of independence is likely to be reflected when it comes to a first-past-the-post, winner-takes-all system, or is that just something that we're seeing with those council results in those particular neighbour areas? But really interesting, and it's going to continue to evolve as we get more numbers through and as we get those results coming through from London tomorrow as well.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Ed Conway there talking us through all of the numbers. Well, the election results are, of course, likely to dominate tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Alston, and The Guardian's deputy political editor, Jessica Elgott. Right, well, with us now is Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK. Thanks very much for being on the programme. What do you make of the results?
Well, we're delighted with the by-election result, first of all, where we almost pipped the Tories into second place, but that was our strongest by-election results by some margin. First time we've actually got a sort of well above our national polling, which put paid to all those sort of naysayers that said we couldn't do that. And we're starting to win council seats. We've just removed the leader of the Havant Council, the Tory leader of that, so that's good progress. And also in the north, for example, in Sunderland, we beat the Tories in 16 out of 25 seats. So what's happening is actually in the north in particular, we're now becoming seriously essentially the opposition to the Labour Party. So look, Rome's not built in a day, but we're very happy and delighted with the results we've got so far.
At the same time, though, you know, you're way below the shares that UKIP was getting in the run-up to Brexit. And even then,
but they had been
UKIP didn't manage to translate that into any parliamentary seats.
They'd been around for 20 years.
Yeah, but they
didn't.
Been around
for
what I'm
3
saying
years.
is they still didn't cut through in Westminster. Even despite their performance in the locals, they did not manage to get one seat.
There's a massive difference. The country wasn't broken.
I'm going to do what politicians always do to me and say, please, can you allow me to finish? OK? UKIP outpolled you, got way better shares than you in seats in local elections, and they didn't win a single parliamentary seat. You are so far away from being that force in politics.
Completely wrong, absolutely wrong. The big difference then is the country wasn't broken then. The country's completely broken now. And yes, first past the post, which is a terrible electoral system. It's tough on the way up, but it's absolutely brutal on the way down. And the Tories are sinking, and they're facing annihilation in this forthcoming generation. Quite right too, given what they've done to the country. We've got two forms of socialism in the two main parties. There's no difference between the two of them. The highest taxes for 70 years, the highest government spending for 70 years, the lowest growth.
A socialist, you'd say Richard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The truth is they are socialists. It's literally the definition of socialism to raise taxes, raise spending, get worse outcomes, no growth, and they've imposed on us mass immigration that no one voted for, so they need to be ousted. They betrayed the trust of the British people in 2019. They betrayed our trust that we placed in them. So all this nonsense that we'll end up doing a deal, forget it. It's not going to happen.
If you manage to effectively enable Labour to take power by taking votes off the Conservatives, will you be OK with that?
I don't mind where we take votes from. The truth is, at this election, our objective is actually, we want to see if we can get more votes cast than the Conservatives. It's ambitious, but it's well doable. And here's the thing. Actually, people need to stop being afraid of what they vote for. Actually say, I want to vote positively. I want to vote for change. I want to vote for reform. The country's in such a state. Britain needs reform. That's the simple reality.
Rishi Sunak or
they're both socialists. It's going to be a disaster for the country. There's no growth. We've got the longest recession for 70 years per person. And there's nothing that the Labour Party or the Tory Party, none of their plans will change that. We've got to change course. Otherwise, we're in deep trouble. Our policies about making work pay, about getting to zero waiting lists on healthcare in 2 years, have a proper debate about that, freezing immigration so you get higher wage growth for British workers. This is how you save Britain and get us moving again.
You talk about saving Britain, about getting things moving again. But, you know, as I said, you haven't quite cut through in the same way that UKIP did. And I'm going to say this in the kind of politest way possible, because, look, you've got a lot of TV studios, you come on the show, we're very grateful for that. Is the missing ingredient Nigel Farage?
Well, look, everybody asks me that, and we're very good friends, and Nigel's got a big decision to make, and everybody knows that. I'm saying, look, the more help that Nigel can give, the better. No one's saying this is easy. It's not.
Does it make you a bit cross when you're like, I'm the guy who's head of reform, and everyone's asking me about the guy who used to run UKIP? Does that annoy you?
There's no iron team. And, you know, if you're trying to change something, and as we're growing, we need to grow the team, the more help than he's the most famous politician in the country. But he thought he'd left frontline politics. If he wants to come back into it, it's a big decision.
Does he want to come back?
Well,
you must know.
Let's wait and see. The clock is ticking, because we could be facing a summer election, although most people expect it to be in the autumn. Whenever it is, we'll be ready. We're standing 630 seats. And the truth is, if people want reform, if they want change, you've got to vote for it.
You're supposed to be straight talkers.
I'm a straight talker.
Go on, tell us what Nigel Farage is thinking then.
You have to ask him. It's in his mind, not in my mind.
You know. Come on.
You'll have to ask him.
It's not a no.
You'll have to ask him. It's at the end of the day, it's his decision. It's not my decision. I can't order him to do this or that. I welcome the more help we can get, the better, because it's a big job, and this is a multi-election project. We think we can get more votes than the Tories in terms of votes cast at this general election, and then we will be the opposition that's taking on Labour in 28, 29. That's the direction of travel.
You really, really, hand on heart, think that?
If you've got no ambition in life, then you ain't going to succeed. It's as simple as that, whether it's in business or whether it's in politics. The Tories laughed at me 3 years ago when I pushed on with Reform UK. They're not laughing now. They're absolutely terrified.
It's different, though, isn't it? Saying you've got an ambition to do something and saying you think you're going to do it. I mean, I can have an ambition to, speak fluent French tomorrow, but it's not going to happen, is it?
If you haven't got any ambition, you're never going to make progress. And we're ambitious, and we're working out plans how you get that. That's the difference.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK. Still to come on the Politics Hub, the Lib Dems have been making solid gains throughout the day, but are they set to win so-called blue wall seats from the Conservatives at the next election? We'll be speaking to their local government spokesperson, Helen Morgan. Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here in the meantime. Sam's been poring over the numbers. He's also been speaking to lots of people in the Conservative Party today. How kind of rattled do you think they are, Sam, by the Reform Party?
I actually think that what you saw with Reform is one of the most consequential bits of the set of election results today, not because Reform particularly won much, and the story about Reform isn't about them winning. So sorry to your previous guess, but it is about the impact that it's having on the Conservative Party, and what you saw was Reform UK turning from a polling phenomenon into something that clearly takes votes from the Tories. I think it's going to have two impacts. First of all, you saw in Blackpool almost the same number of Tory votes as there were Reform. It's going to eat into seats. First of all, there'll be a conversation in the Tory party whether or not they should move more decisively into Reform policy positions, should Rishi Sunak commit to leaving the European Convention of Human Rights. But then they will revisit something from recent Tory history. In 2019, one of the reasons Boris Johnson won a big majority was because they persuaded the Brexit Party, the forerunner to Reform UK, to stand aside in lots of key seats. As it stands, Richard Tice's party is planning to stand in every single seat in Great Britain, perhaps with the exception of the Speaker. I think they're going to try and find ways to put enormous pressure on Reform UK to do the same as 2019 and stand aside. But as far as I can tell, that's not going to happen. That's why Reform is a really big issue.
It's so interesting. And Sam, what's your kind of big takeaway on the results so far? Because we're kind of trying to work out a narrative on the show tonight.
I think there's one big point, which is that the 2019 electoral coalition that Boris Johnson knitted together has scattered to the winds. Labour advances in Leave areas. The direct switching from Tory to Conservative in North and South, the geographical spread, all of that makes it look difficult for Rishi Sunak. He hasn't knitted together his own electoral coalition. You're just seeing the party retrench. I think it's that collapse that matters more than any other story today.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor. Right, well, stay with us on this Politics Hub special. Lots more still to come. I'm going to be speaking to the Labour MP Clive Betts, who says his party needs to do more to address the concerns of Muslim voters. Right, let's bring in our duo for tonight, shall we? The former Government Special Advisor James Starkie and the former Labour Minister That's Caroline Flint. Great to have you both on the show. Well, I'm interested to get your kind of thoughts on Richard Tice. Caroline, what was going through your mind listening to him?
Well, I mean, you know, people might not like me saying this, but I sort of feel like, you know, UKIP party, Brexit party, Reform, they just keep changing their names, really, and rebranding themselves to suit the times. And I agree with Sam. I mean, this isn't really about them even getting an MP. And, you know, Farage is going to think very carefully before he puts his hat in the ring, because I don't think he'd want to lose if he did. So, you know, why would he? That's why he hasn't stood in the past. But I think it's about, you know, where they can take votes away from the Tories. And the issue between, you know, 2019, when, you know, Boris Johnson was able to get a deal with the Brexit party on some of the places where they didn't stand, is actually they thought he was going to win. And therefore there might be some crumbs from the table to the Brexit party, maybe put Nigel Farage in the House of Lords, who knows what it might be. At the moment, Rishi hasn't got the leverage to offer that to Richard Tice.
That's a good point. I never actually thought about it that way, but that does actually make quite a lot of sense. James, what's your take on Reform? How worried should the Conservatives be?
They should be worried. I mean, it's interesting. They are evidently taking votes, but as you pointed out, they're doing less well than UKIP, and Richard considered himself at it for 20 years and still didn't get anywhere in terms of seats. You know, Nigel Farage himself is undoubtedly one of the most consequential politicians of the last few decades, because we almost certainly wouldn't have had the Brexit vote without him. But as a party to be able to win seats, they never managed to really do that, and it's unlikely. Reform is showing no evidence at all they're going to do that.
Because you were involved in the Vote Leave campaign, weren't you? And you kept Farage at arm's length.
Well, I mean, Vote Leave became the official campaign, and you know, Nigel ran.
They were the disruptor campaign.
Well, he appealed to a big part of that group of the public, the core Leave vote, and you know, I think one of the reasons I think they did a pact with Boris is you couldn't question Boris on Brexit. So, if you were going to go and run a Brexit party against Boris Johnson, the guy that co-ran the Vote Leave campaign, that would look a bit odd. Rishi himself was a Brexiteer, but is certainly not seen in the same way as Boris, so it's easier for them to kind of run that way.
Just talking about Labour, because look, I think everyone can agree Reform eating into the Conservative vote. We did see some evidence of other parties eating into Labour's vote this time as well, didn't we? I mean, particularly the Green Party, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's the nature of these local elections, actually. And in some places, I think, you know, like a Green Party councillor has maybe got stuck in there and done, to be honest, dare I say it, a reasonable job on the doorstep. And people sort of give people the benefit of the doubt. I've seen that in, you know, in areas that I've lived, in Doncaster and elsewhere, where independents get in. Usually something's gone wrong, maybe some individual issue with the existing, maybe Labour council or what have you. And these things happen in these elections, particularly when you've got a third as well. As we have in so many of these elections. Whether that actually pans out in translating to a significant vote to affect Starmer's strategy to win, not only hold on to Labour seats, but to win more Labour seats, I don't think it's as strong in terms of the danger for the Tories with Reform.
Interesting. Do you think that's true?
Yes, probably in truth. Reform poses the single biggest threat to any of the parties. They're taking more of the vote on a consistent basis. I think with the Green, we don't really know with the Greens, because we can see on the numbers there's that big other group. Now, to be frank, I think if the Lib Dems had any other leader of the Lib Dems in my lifetime, a kind of Charlie Kennedy, a Nick Clegg or someone, they would be doing much better.
Really? Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, you know, the personality at the top is really important in all these things. But one thing I would say about the Green vote as well, I have seen in Tory seats, people who are disaffected with Tories voting Green. They won't ever vote Labour, but actually in some of those seats. I remember canvassing in Pudsey some years ago and knocking on doors, and we were trying desperately to win there at that time. And I met so many Conservative voters who may be right-wing fiscally, but actually are quite, you know, very much in favour of a sort of greener future as well. So I think it doesn't translate left and right sometimes.
We often put voters in boxes, and that's just not fair, actually.
Exactly.
People will vote for all kinds of reasons, and they have their own priorities, and I think that's completely true. Thank you both very much indeed. Really interesting discussion. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, we'll get the verdict from voters in our target town constituency of Grimsby and Cleethorpes. Plus, the Lib Dems have been making solid gains throughout the day, but are they set to win so-called blue wall seats from the Conservatives at the next election? I'll be speaking to their local government spokesperson, Helen Morgan.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling? I am angry. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
You're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that.
We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world.
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Hello, you're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News. The top stories tonight. Keir Starmer says it's time for Rishi Sunak to face the nation and call a general election after the Conservatives suffer a hammering in the local elections. Rishi Sunak's admitted that results have been disappointing, but says holding on to the Tees Valley mayoralty was a very important test that his party passed. Plus, you can stay up to date with all the goings-on in the election this weekend on our digital politics hub, including Sky News' projection showing Labour would be on course to be the largest party in a general election, but would fall short of an overall majority. Find out more by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. Now, last week I was in our target town constituency of Grimsby and Cleethorpes, hearing from people there about why they've turned off from politics. So what's the mood there today after the local elections? Here's our national correspondent, Tom Parmenter.
Bex's Barbers, where politics has become a pain.
To be honest with you, it just gives me an headache. It fries my brains. You could say one thing and do another, so nobody knows.
Is this about trust?
Yeah, and I don't think people have trust in the government at all.
Nobody is particularly inspired in Grimsby. 78% of people here didn't even vote yesterday. Where do you think people are at with the whole political...
Fed up, probably in disillusions, and I think that Grimsby, as you say, was a big swing vote for Boris, and I think people did that on the promise that there was going to be big changes. And I think there's two things. I think nationally people are fed up and can't see things changing, but locally we're one of the areas that got tens of millions of pounds, and if you ask people where that's gone, I don't think they would know. And I think from the local authority, they seem to never make any decisions, and everything takes so long to notice change. So I think it just reflects people being fed up.
While a lot of voters switched to Labour here, nothing convinced Ashley to bother voting.
I don't see no changes. In fact, I've seen prices going up, everything's going up. So you're not helping anybody. Everybody's really, really struggling. And that is what frustrates me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next in the queue, Steve, a Labour voter desperate for change.
I think Conservatives have had enough time to try and sort something out, and nothing seems to be working, so I think it's time for a change.
But he can also see why people are so uninspired.
It's like choosing between a kick in the head and a kick in the gut. You're going to get hurt either way. So...
Is that better?
Yeah. That may be true, but the shift towards something different has started, here and across the nation. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Grimsby.
Right, let's get some reaction from the Lib Dems now. Helen Morgan, the spokesperson for Housing, Communities and Local Government, joins us now live. Thank you very much for being with us. So what do you make of the results that we've had?
Well, I think it's obviously been a really awful night for the Conservatives. They've been told very clearly by voters that they're ready for a general election and they want to see a change. And from a Liberal Democrat perspective, I think we've really had a good night. We've seen good, solid progress and big gains in the areas that we think we can win in a general election. So we're feeling very positive about the results this evening, particularly in places like Surrey, which are at the heart of the Blue War, and across the West Country. So very pleased this evening.
You say it's been kind of good, solid progress, and it feels that's quite an accurate description, maybe. It hasn't been great, has it?
It has. I mean, if you look at the kind of seats that were up for grabs this time round, they were largely red wall seats. But where there have been blue wall seats that we want to target, we've done very well in them. You know, we've topped the poll in places like Esher and Walton. We've topped the poll in places like Hazel Grove and Cheadle, target areas that we really need to win at the next election. And I think we're feeling positive about those. We've moved forward in Winchester as well, Cheltenham. I won't list them all off, but most of our sort of target seats in those key areas, we've had a good night in.
Yeah, you made some gains, obviously, you know, up 72 seats. You know, that's not to be sniffed at. You're currently level pegging with the Conservatives on the number of seats. You haven't taken control of any more councils than before, though. I just wonder, you know, if this was your kind of breakthrough moment before a general election, we haven't seen that, have we?
Well, I don't think we were expecting the councils that were up for grabs yesterday to be the breakthrough moment. We already had huge majorities on those councils in our target seats. And as I say, a lot of the councils that were up for election yesterday were more sort of red war focused. I think we had a really big breakthrough moment last year when we made over 400 gains. And we've made gains in every set of local elections since 2019. So we have seen really strong, solid progress. And to build on those big 4 by-election wins we had, I think we are feeling very positive about the general election when it happens later this year. And as I say, particularly in places like Surrey, we're taking control of Tunbridge Wells Council. We're feeling really positive.
Our panellist, James Starkie, I'm not sure he's going to thank me for saying this, but he said earlier on the programme that if you had any other leader other than Ed Davey that the Lib Dems had previously, whether it's, you know, Paddy Ashdown or whether it's Nick Clegg, then you would be doing much better than under Ed Davey. What would you say to that?
I would disagree with him. And as I say, we've got to look at what's happened in this period since 2019. We've had 4 spectacular by-election wins. You know, I won with a spin of 34%. We've had, as I say, local election gains in every set of local elections. We've won a huge number of council by-elections, and it's an extremely strong performance from a leader, and one that we haven't seen since those days of Paddy Ashdown and Charles Kennedy.
The Greens have done pretty well too. They picked up 67 seats in these set of elections, and also independent parties as well with 102 more seats. Do you think this is one of the issues, that the votes are kind of splintering? Yes, people are rejecting the Conservatives. That's the kind of big narrative, if you like, of what's happened with these set of results. But they're going all over the place.
I mean, I think there is some element of that vote splitting in some of the councils that we perhaps would have wanted to have taken control of. But I don't think we're worried about that when it comes to a Westminster election, because the Greens aren't realistically challenging in many seats at all in a Westminster election. They're in danger of losing the 1 seat that they hold, and they don't seem to be able to translate those local council votes into Westminster votes, where people have demonstrated in these big by-elections that they know exactly how to go about tactical voting. And I think that's not going to be a problem by the time we get to a general election.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the Politics Hub.
Thank you.
Coming up next on the programme, I'll be speaking to the Labour MP Clive Betts, who says the party needs to do more to address the concern of Muslim voters. Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub election special. Well, one of the standout subplots of today's election results has been how Labour's been performing less well in areas where there are high proportions of Muslim voters. Now, this has been taken as a verdict on the party's position on the situation in Gaza. We can speak now to the Labour MP, Clive Betts. Look, I guess we are putting one and one together and making two. We're not completely sure why people vote the way they do, but do you think there is evidence of voters switching away from the Labour Party because of their stance on Gaza?
Yes, no doubt at all about it. In my constituency, people tell me that very clearly. And in one of our wards, which was normally one of our safest Labour wards, an independent candidate got elected fighting solely on the issue of Gaza. He didn't fight on anything else. That was all his leaflets were about. So people voted for him on the basis that they were unhappy with Labour and unhappy with our stance on Gaza. A lot of that was mistaken, I think, view that we hadn't changed our position on Gaza from a few months ago. But once people take a view that we got it wrong, it's very difficult to change their minds.
Do you think this is effectively a protest vote against Labour, but these people will come back in a general election?
It's not as simple as that. I think some will come back, and particularly if we change our position and make it clear that what Israel is doing in Gaza now is completely and utterly unacceptable, and that if necessary we have to take sanctions against the Israeli government for their mass killing of women, children and other innocent people in Gaza, and make it absolutely clear that a Labour government, if elected, will recognise a Palestinian state. In some ways, what's happened with the protest in Gaza, however, is a long-running sore in the Muslim community about how they feel Palestinians have been treated ever since the war. Displaced after the war, sent to refugee camps, not allowed to return, and in the West Bank and Gaza treated like second-class citizens and occupied by Israel. That's the situation. The Gaza attack has now brought this all to the fore. So we have a long way to go, I think, to bring Muslim communities back to us. Some of us are going to work very hard to do that.
Putting the sort of policy to one side, some in Labour are suggesting that, yes, this is a really important issue to many voters. They understand that. But in purely cold-hearted electoral terms, this is not enough people to effectively swing constituencies at a general election. What would you say to that?
It may affect a few constituencies. I don't think it's going to affect the overall election result. That's absolutely right. But that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't get the right policies, adopt the right policies, and stand up for people who are being attacked and killed in Gaza, and for the Palestinian people to have their own state in the future. They're the right things to do, irrespective of electoral maths. But I have to say, in terms of electoral maths, I basically won my seat at the last election with overwhelming support from that part of my constituency where a majority of Muslim people live. So I owe them that, and I'm going to fight for them now to have a good response from the Labour Party to the concerns they're raising.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Clive Betts there, Labour MP, speaking to us from Sheffield. Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here with me now. Because, Sam, it's been a bit of a marathon for us today, I think it's fair to say. My panel will just laugh at me because I've got a little stash of sweets by the desk, which is kind of necessary at this point in the proceedings. But there was a moment that kind of stood out to us, I think, earlier, wasn't there? It was one of the election results that kind of we're not expecting until tomorrow night, which is the race for the London mayoralty. There's a couple of jitters that we're picking up, and we don't know if these are founded, if it's spin, if it's just WhatsApp groups going into overdrive, but what's going on?
So shortly after the polls closed on Thursday night, there were some people close to the Conservative candidate, Susan Hall, who seeming to suggest that they thought they were in with a chance. And that rumour rattled around and has rattled around all day. And I think it reached its peak while we were on air mid-afternoon when we were interviewing, you were interviewing with a little bit of assistance from me, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary. I said, are you nervous that Susan Hall's going to beat Sadiq Khan? Here's what he said.
We've always feared this race would be close. Sadiq won by 5% on the first round in the last mayoral election. And since then, the Conservatives have changed the voting system so that other progressives voting for the Liberal Democrats or the Greens, for example, couldn't transfer their second preferences to Sadiq in the way they did last time. So we were warning Londoners, you know, don't take the risk of waking up with a Conservative mayor. I know that the voting system frustrates people sometimes, especially supporters of the smaller parties who think, oh, but, you know, I've now got this dilemma. Am I voting against someone or am I voting for the person that I want? But that was the warning we were making to Londoners, and I hope it's been heeded.
Yeah, you do pick up a little bit of concern there, and Caroline was mentioning it earlier on the programme as well, that the change of the voting system in London, where it's now first past the post, so you know you only get one vote and you can choose one of the smaller parties and you don't get the chance to put Sadiq Khan or whoever you want as your second preference.
That's right. I mean, that interview was a double eyebrow raise moment, frankly, when we were sitting there. I put in quite a lot of messages. Now, it's important to say what has and hasn't happened. They've done some of the verification and they've got some of the turnout figures. Turnout in London for the mayoral election is down a tiny bit, which Labour MPs think is not great for Sadiq Khan. But this evening, there's been a shift. And I have to say that both Labour HQ and Conservative MPs now do think that Sadiq Khan will have squeaked it tomorrow. There is a lot fewer jitters than there were a few hours ago when Labour folk were going, well, we told you it would be close, we don't know. That seems to have calmed. Don't forget, the polls put Sadiq Khan comfortably ahead. The polls may not turn out to be right, but now there seems to be a consensus from both sides that Labour will retain the mayoralty in London.
There you go. What about the West Mids? Any intel on that?
So there, it sounds as if Andy Street may well have clung on. I mean, again, if London might have been at risk because of the areas of London with a high Muslim population, so too in the West Midlands. You've got George Galloway-sponsored candidates there also making inroads into the Labour vote. It does seem as if the sort of central projection there is that Andy Street hangs on.
Well, we may find out tomorrow. Sam, thank you very much indeed. We'll be back tomorrow bringing you all of those results. Should be some interesting ones to come. But still to come on this programme, on the Politics Hub, I'm going to be getting some final thoughts from our political editor, Beth Rigby. Plus, we've rounded up the key moments of the day for you, so stay with us.
The type of religions I do, it's almost theatre of the mind. So it's using people's memories, emotions and experiences and
I'm scared.
Crafting some things from those things. You seem terrified. I promise it's going to be okay.
So you're going to give us an example?
I would love to show you something if that's okay. Do. Yeah. So I brought like a book that inspired me as a kid. Obviously, Harry Potter, Goblet of Fire. It's the real deal.
Did you read
this as a kid? Oh, clearly you know it well. Book 4.
No, it's not. No, it's later. It's 5.
Goblet of Fire is 5.
You've disgraced yourself on air, Will. Oh my goodness.
Yes, I'm a big fan. I haven't read them for a long time.
Well, grab it for me right now. You're going to start from the beginning and read to the end. No, don't worry, please. First of all, please make sure it is the real Harry Potter book. Have a good look through it.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to ask you to do, please, I'm going to turn away whilst he does this. You and I will stare intensely at each other. And open up to any page that you like, Will. And once you've done that, you are going to focus on a word on that page. Now, this is live on air. I don't want you to choose a short word like goblet or fire. Choose a really long word with lots of letters, something that's going to challenge me. Choose a really long word. Do you have a nice long word in mind?
I do.
Don't say it out loud. Close the book. And is it safe for me to turn around now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to start really simply. All you're going to do is just focus on the first letter of that word. Get that first letter inside your head. And now you're going to jump to another letter inside the word as well. Perfect. What was the first letter of the word that you were focused on?
G.
G, yes. And now you're just going to focus on the second letter. Don't say it out loud. Is that an R that you're focused on?
It is.
It is, yes.
Oh my God.
Okay, I'm going to take a hit on this. I'm going to show you. I think this is related to family.
It is.
And the way that you're holding your hands right now, it clearly is.
Wow.
Maybe someone that's inspired you. What was the word that you were focused on? A word in tens of thousands.
Grandfatherly.
Not grandfather, grandfatherly. Something like this, yes?
Unless Leah is your mole.
Innocent
You planted her years ago.
This is a strange insight into some of the illusions that you'll see in Wonders. So you see, it's not strange props or people in boxes. It's taking people back in time to those experiences that maybe inspired them in their lives.
That was insane.
That was amazing.
Thank you, my friend.
I promise I was looking, like, there was no phony business.
Big stage show. It's in the Theatre Royal in Brighton, which is a beautiful show. And it's a show that explores the power of wonder in your life, how that can motivate and inspire you.
Hello and welcome back to this Politics Hub election special. Right, let's bring in our jury for the evening, shall we, for a final chat. The former Government Special Advisor James Starkie and the former Labour Minister Caroline Flint. Now, it felt to me like there were two big narratives going into this election. Can Labour prove that they're on course for a majority? And can Rishi Sunak prove that he's done enough to quiet the rebels, that he's definitely going to lead the Conservatives into the next election? James, do you think he's done that?
Yeah, I think the rebellion was always overstated. In truth, like I think in the some of the media, in that there wasn't that many MPs calling for it. But the danger that there was there, I think it was almost agreed beforehand that if Street and Houchin win, that probably wouldn't be enough. And we saw a flurry of activity from Number 10 over the last couple of weeks. We had Mellon earlier, we had the benefit stuff, we had defence spending and so on. So I think that was part of shoring up going into these locals. Houchin's won, it does look like Street's going to win. So it seems to have fizzled out, I think, to the extent that one of the alleged rebels has even briefed the media today that they've gone off to the pub.
That's it then.
So,
game over.
Yeah.
They're not going to the pub to plot then, they're going to cry to drown their sorrows in a pint. Is that
exactly,
what you thought?
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So that's it. Sunak's definitely going to lead the Conservatives into the election. Rebellion's quashed.
Look, I think right now that looks very much likely.
And how about from the Labour sort of perspective? Do you think Keir Starmer's done enough to prove that he's on course for a majority?
I think he'd be pretty pleased with the outcome of today. I think, look, we've seen some of the polling from Ed earlier. Actually, there has been a slight drop and actually we're not necessarily seeing a massive uppick. But the fact is he's making progress. And I think now, I never necessarily thought that actually, I thought it would be crazy 6 months before a potential general election for a rebellion to get rid of Rishi Sunak. But I have to say it's about the psychological impact. Labour will come out of this and Keir Starmer will come out of this feeling strong, feeling confident. It will completely enthuse the base to get out there over the next 6 months. The other side of that is the psychological impact on the Conservatives. Despite holding Tees Valley, despite maybe keeping the West Midlands under Andy Street, they have suffered today. They have lost half of their council seats that were up for grabs. And therefore, that is bound to have a big impact on the morale. Look out for other Tory MPs saying they're not standing. Look out for very concerned and upset former Tory councillors and what they might be feeling, because it will not be a split, it will not be a challenge to Rishi Sunak, but it will dampen the support on the ground to have the fervour to get out there when the election's called.
I guess my other big question is about the timing of the general election, because it feels like if it was going to be July, and there has been speculation in Westminster, right, that it's going to be early, we'd probably get a sense of it kind of about now. What do you guys think?
I always thought it was going to be the autumn of this year. I can't see any advantage in this in terms of Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives going earlier. They may as well play it out for time and try and hopefully see some, green growths of recovery in somewhere or another, so they can at least hold their heads up a bit high when they go into that election. But actually now it's all about whoever's going to be campaigning, I think, down the road to be the next leader after election.
What do you think?
I think they prepared for kind of late June, July more than people are aware. Partly to handle the rebellion. I think there was concern about it, and it was one way of dealing with it. He could go to the country. I think it's always been the case that the kind of 70%, 80% chance was it will be October, November. Not least, going back to what we discussed earlier, I think he needs time to demonstrate delivery.
Yeah.
And the number one of that is the economy. And by that point, it looks like you might get a rate cut, which would, I'm sure there'll be debates about how much that affects people, but it would undoubtedly be a big marker when there's the first rate cut that there's been improvement in the economy.
So the fact that the rebellion's fizzled out means that the prospects of a June-July election have gone the same way. They're down the pub having their pint as well, right?
I would think so. We're going on the way out. We're going to check down at the Red Line.
We're going to have a look at the Red Line, see who's around.
I think so.
You can. I'm back to Doncaster.
I think I need to go to bed, I'll be honest, as much as I would like to. I think I need to go get a bit of sleep. Thanks both very much. It's always great to have you on the panel, and particularly for big days like today, so thank you. Well, as we come to the end of the programme, let's take a look back, shall we, at some of the memorable moments of the day, and there's been quite a few.
It is a fantastic result, a really first-class result.
As I showed in 2015, you can have bad local election results and go on and win a general election. Rishi Sunak could fly over the UK tonight in an helicopter and drop £1 million down every chimney, and they would still vote him out come October.
It's clearly not a good result, but it means we have to get behind the Prime Minister, focus on the general election, which is going to take place this year.
Ben Houchen said he was relieved, and I expect the Prime Minister's even more relieved.
I can't help but notice, look, I admit you've got a blue tie on, but you decided not to wear a blue Conservative rosette. Why is that?
Well, I have done it previous elections, and the honest answer is I didn't have one and I forgot it. But I've got my blue socks on and my blue tie on.
I don't know if I believe him, I'll be honest, that he just forgot his blue rosette. I'm not sure if I believe that's
I think he forgot who the Prime Minister was on some of his literature, didn't he? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that might be.
That.
He remembered, though, when he turned up in Tees Valley. He had a quick remembering. And here is Beth Rigby, as if she needs any introduction, our political editor. I feel like I just need to take a breath, honestly, after...
As you were saying, a long lie down.
Yeah, long lie down in a dark room. Beth.
Yes.
It's been a monster day. What are your kind of big takeaways now?
Well, look, I was just looking in the past hour about where have we actually landed up. Because if we go back to basics, what were we trying to measure? We were looking at council seats, and we were looking at what were the Conservatives going to lose and what were Labour going to gain, and what did that tell us about both the fortunes of Sunak and the fortunes of Starmer. And I think it is a bit clearer, because if you actually look at the seats, for the Conservatives, it's the worst possible night. That I think they're at about nearly 500 losses now. They look like by the end of play, I think about 98, 99 councils out of 107. Are they going to be about 500 losses? That was the worst case scenario. It looks like they're hitting that. For Labour, though, the challenge is, the question is, that they are not picking up, perhaps, enough of that. There's not the straight switching in a way that perhaps they would have hoped. So I was told that they were hoping to pick up hundreds of seats, and they're coming out of the other end. And I think at the moment, I can probably see it on the screen if I look at the right time. I think it was about 170 seats that Labour had gained. OK, so for Labour, you know, I was talking to them about this because we obviously do our national equivalent vote. They don't like that projection much because they say...
they don't. It doesn't give the majority.
But also that what they argue is that they are targeting an efficiency of voters, they would say, whereby they are targeting in battlegrounds that they need to win in a general election, and on the results and on the council it shows that they are doing that. So for them, they are genuinely, to quote someone, very happy with the results. They think it means they're on course for a general election victory. And what they point out is that on these national equivalent votes, when you extrapolate out the massive switch into smaller parties and independents, that's not necessarily how people vote as a general election. Both of them are fair points to make. But I do think there's another question on all of this, which is if people think that they want change and they're fed up with the Conservatives, is there this massive swing to the level that Labour probably would secretly have wanted to say that the change is the Labour Party? Or is it a bit of trust is broken in politics and they don't much like either of them at the moment, right? And that's not to do down the gains that Labour have made at all. They are, you know, showing momentum. There's a 10-point gap between the Conservatives and Labour in the national equivalent vote share that we've projected. They say that puts them onto a majority. And when I saw Starmer, to be fair, in Harlow this week, you know, that was a seat we went to because he thought they were going to win it, and he said we need to win it. They didn't quite get there, but he was exceedingly confident in a way that I've followed him around for years, and he is on his best form. And you could say politics is a confidence game, and he's full of it. One of his former advisors said to me he wears his polls on his sleeve, and you can see the confidence. But I think that there's a question that there's more work to do. But then what his aides would say is they know that they have to fight for every vote.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there, our political editor. Well, it has been a big day for us. In many ways, people focusing on these local elections as a test for Rishi Sunak. It feels like he's done enough to perhaps make sure he's going to lead the Conservatives into the election. Whether or not he's going to win that or even have a half-decent performance, Well, that is still to come. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. for more coverage.